an author in her own right, as well as a well-known and respected journalist here in Miami for Univision Television. Please let's give them both a nice warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. I don't even know if the mic is on. Is the mic on? Okay, but if you can hear me, we're fine. We're in business. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start out a presentation that I wrote for a colleague and a friend who I highly admire, and then we're going to let her come up and say a few things, and then we'll do some Q&A. Okay? Sure. All right. Okay. As a woman who doesn't accept the word no for an answer, Lydia Cacho is not only one of Mexico's most revered journalists, but she's also an activist, thank you for the mic, and a dedicated advocate who has made it her lifelong mission to expose and document thousands of cases of sex trafficking and exploitation of young women and children. And she has paid a hefty price for her investigative work. In 1999, shortly after publishing stories about violence against women, she was attacked and raped at a Cancun bus station. Her broken bones, too many to count. Her assailant was never caught, but a part of her feels he was probably sent to silence her investigations. The episode, however, only fueled her passion, compelling her to open a shelter for battered women in the seaside city the following year. Shortly thereafter, she began an in-depth investigation into child pornography and sex trafficking rings in Cancun that led to the publication of her best-selling book, The Demons of Eden. Now, much to her surprise and dismay at the same time, that book led to her arrest and torture by Mexican authorities in 2005. It was later revealed these officers acted on orders from a former governor who received very generous donations from a powerful businessman who was a pedophile and ran a child pornography ring in Mexico. The case went all the way up to Mexico's Supreme Court, making Lydia the first woman in that country to testify at that level. Now, since then, she has received her share of death threats, actually leaving her beloved Mexico for several months at one point when a phone call she received was a little too close for comfort. So despite all of this, she rejects the thought of ever permanently leaving Mexico, and she continues to write, to report, to investigate, and to expose those who profit from trading women and children for sex. She's published 7 books and has co-authored several collective books as well. Currently, she is a columnist for El Universal, a highly respected Mexican newspaper. She has also had her own television interview program and radio segments. In her free time, when she does have some free time, she enjoys yoga, her beautiful garden, the ocean, and her 4 gorgeous dogs who I had a chance to meet just a couple of days ago, Luna, Matilda, Cali, and Petra. They're incredible. Among her numerous international awards for outstanding journalism, Lydia has received the coveted Olaf Palme Prize, the UNESCO Guillermo Cano Freedom of Expression Award, the Wallenberg Medal, the Civil Courage Award, and the Janetta Sagan Award from Amnesty International, to name a few. I could go on and on and on. Her latest book, Slaves of Power, I see some of you have that in your hands, a journey into sex trafficking of women and girls around the world, took her to almost 50 countries in a span of 7 years. From her native Mexico, where she entered the streets of La Merced, one of the most notorious and drug-laden neighborhoods, disguising herself, believe it or not, as a nun, in order to walk freely and see firsthand the brothels that line the streets and how girls are marketed and sold for sex. During her travels through Muslim countries, she proved that, unlike what many think, sexual exploitation does exist and is on the rise in the Arab world. From Turkey to Thailand, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Spain, and Russia, she spoke to survivors and those who risked their lives to rescue victims, to expose the international Johns who consider their work a noble way to fight poverty. That's one of their excuses. A true heroine for thousands of children and abused women around the world, what really drives Lydia's passion is her commitment to those victims of sexual slavery, those who are too young, too poor, and too uneducated to speak up for themselves. A firm believer that until cultural beliefs about sex are addressed and changed, given the machista-driven society that dictates them, little will be altered. It is a grim reality that she feels can only improve with education and the implementation of laws that emphasize the value of human life, that provide job opportunities, thereby lessening poverty, and a system that provides equal access to health care, allowing the poor and abused to receive adequate medical care. Now, as I read chapter by chapter, I couldn't put the book down. What did I learn? I learned a lot. I learned that the sex industry is a very profitable multi-million-dollar empire, and that as long as corruption exists, international agreements to combat international trafficking will fall short of concrete solutions. I learned that there is a new breed of mafia. This new breed of mafia specializes in human slavery and provides protection to those responsible. Protection. And I learned that the men who keep this illegal trade flourishing and who contribute to the global tragedy could be anyone. They could be a co-worker, they could be happily married, could be a teacher, a congressman, an outstanding athlete, a member of the clergy. In other words, they could be the man next door. But what moved me the most was the victims' stories. One example was Sarah. She left the United States at 18, thinking she would be discovered as a singer in Japan. Instead, she ended up working at a nightclub. She was drugged, and she was gang raped by members of the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza. She barely survived. She managed to escape. However, Sarah will forever live with the physical and emotional trauma that she endured. She will never bear children due to the hemorrhaging that she suffered and the scars that are a reminder of the cruelty that she endured. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce you to a very brave and passionate woman who has set the bar at the highest possible level when it comes to investigative journalism. A valiant woman, and I say that with a capital V for valiant, a champion of women and children's causes who hopes, and I know, and she knows too, that deep inside her work is making a difference. A journalist who firmly believes that only by exposing these monsters and their corrupt ways can apathy and impunity cease to exist. A woman who I am proud to call a colleague, but most importantly, a friend. Lydia Cacho. You speak, then I'll join you.
Sit next to me. Thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you for Books and Books for the invitation, for Rocio and Jose for this amazing organization, and for you to come on a rainy day. Thank you so much. Well, Teresa was asking me to tell you how I began my journey, not only as a journalist, but also as an activist. A lot of my colleagues in Mexico, they keep telling me that it's not a good idea to be a journalist and then to be a human rights activist on the other side. That is like you're either a journalist or a human rights activist. I do not believe that's right, and I exercise my right to freedom because I think that in every country in which a journalist is constantly writing and investigating stories and listening to people, children, elderly people, women, and understanding their tragedies and how they are harmed by systematic violence or wars or discrimination, we are bound to come back home and then decide what to do as not only as journalists but as citizens. That's why I'm also a human rights activist, and I'm proud of it. So what I do when I write books is I tell my readers who I am, why I do what I do. I am very explicit about the fact that I'm investigating as a journalist, but I am also explicit when I am being an activist and when my opinion comes from someone that is 51 years old who has been investigating human rights violations almost all her life, and I take a stand in certain issues. So Teresa tells me, please talk about your mom, and I will tell you really quick that I truly owe this love for human rights and for freedom from my mom. My mom taught me how to be a feminist. She was a French feminist. She lived in Mexico. She married my Mexican dad, and then they educated us, my brothers, sisters, and I, as free people. We used to discuss everything at home. Back in the 60s and 70s, this forced disappearances from the Mexican government, from the pre-party that is now back in politics. And I kept on listening to these stories about how the guys who were telling the news on Mexican TV were telling lies all over. They were controlled by the political party, and we didn't know what was going on. So it was very weird. We grew up, as a teenager, I grew up in this country in which the TV was telling us something, and then we would go to the streets and see something completely different. So when I discovered I wanted to be a journalist, I promised myself I will always be walking the streets and listening to people that wanted to talk to me and trying to understand how people connect, and how people connect not only to commit crimes or to violate human rights, but also to help each other. And that's what I do. And this book, Slavery Inc., it's the product of a long journey. I investigated a network of politicians and criminals that were exploiting children in Cancun, Mexico. They were doing child pornography with children as young as 2 years old, 4 years old, until 13. And when I uncovered this network, I started writing about it, and I published a book. And in the book, I published not only the stories, I had the evidence, I was able to acquire even some videotape of child pornography these guys were doing. But most importantly, I did know who these guys were. And they were hotel owners, they were from all over the country, from all over the world, and they were networking in money laundering with very, very powerful Mexican politicians, with 5 governors of Mexico in different states, and with senators and judges, and friends that were, pedophiles, but thought it was something cool to be in the parties at this very fancy hotel in front of the beach, having sex with 13-year-old girls. They thought if they were 13 years old and they were in these parties, they were prostitutes. Therefore, there was nothing to be ashamed or feel guilty about. So anyway, I published this book, Demons of Eden, and then a lot of things happened. Teresa already told you I was incarcerated and tortured by these guys. Then I took them to court, etc. But then when I kept talking about this issue, not only about the guys that were guilty, but I was trying to make people understand what child pornography is, what it means to us, to our children everywhere around the world, what the good side of internet can do and what the dark side of internet can do to us. So knowledge is one of the swords of freedom, right? So I insisted that we needed to understand what it was, what child pornography is, who is making it, and why is people profiting from small children and young women all over the world, and why is sex becoming such a big industry nowadays. And I am not moralizing. I am based on ethics when I talk about this. I know that we are owners of our own bodies, but when we talk about slavery, we're talking about the colonization of the bodies and the souls and the freedom of other people. Is when we say that they are slaves, because they truly are. They take away their freedoms, all of the freedoms. It doesn't matter if it's the 60,000 young Americans that are nowadays enslaved in the U.S. It doesn't matter if it's the 200,000 Mexicans that are enslaved in Mexico. It's everywhere around the world. And what I wanted to do with this book was to help people understand how these mafias are working together. Because that was a question everybody asked. After I went for a conference or book presentation in Mexico or anywhere else, at the end of the presentation, people kept asking, how does a Russian mobster in northern Miami is linked to a businessman that is also a trafficker in Cancun, Mexico? Mm-hmm. How is a mobster or a drug dealer from Colombia that is a multi-millionaire tycoon linked to the guys who were selling girls from Colombia and Japan. So that's what I asked myself. I said, okay, everybody's asking these questions. This is what journalism is all about, right? Is to answer questions and to try to help people get all the information. So that's what I did. I took a map of the world and I started linking all the mafias with all this information. I studied a lot. I talked to people everywhere, from local policemen to the Interpol agents, to ICE agents, immigration officers, everywhere. And then once I had the basic map, I said, okay, I'm going to travel for at least 5 years around the world to understand and follow these guys. So I had to learn how to do table dance and pole dance and all this. It's really hard. And it really is. I had to learn how to dress like a woman that is dancing there. And because of my age, it was really hard because usually most girls that are dancing in these clubs near here, for example, in Miami, and the VIP clubs in which I was really interested to get into, they are 18 or 19. I mean, they just found a girl, you know this from the news, in Miami, that in a VIP club that was 13 years old, right? And the owner said, oops, I didn't know she was 13. Yeah. So you can imagine I'm 51. So I thought I'm really old for this business, but I tried my best, and you know, in some places I could get in. And it was really interesting because I was able to talk to the woman and to understand their personal stories. And then, as Teresa told you, there's a very, very dangerous area in Mexico City called La Merced, in which some very brave activists have been documenting how the brothel owners and the traffickers have adult women that are in prostitution, and then they bring their children, and then these guys are exploiting their children too. So these women documented that, but they tried to kill a couple of these activists. So I knew that they knew me because I had been in the news for a long time. I had to dress up, and I was wondering how can I dress up, not to call for attention. And then I talked to a couple of nuns that were doing this work of working around the brothels and talking to the women and everything. I said, hey, that's it. I'm going to dress up as a nun, and I did. And it was amazing. It was very strange because I mean, we can laugh about it a little, but then deep inside, it's really, really worrisome. I dressed up as two opposites in a woman's life, right? As a nun and as the wife of God, or as a prostitute, which is like the woman that everybody mistreats everywhere. And what happened was I walked in these alleys. Of course I was Lydia Cacho, I was the journalist, and I kept wondering, people kept looking at me, and I was like, is he recognizing me? Yes, no. So I had my rosary in my hand and, you know, learned how to hold it properly, and I kept walking, and I could see these traffickers that were standing in the doors of the little brothels that are really little hotels, and I could see the little girls in the alleys, very little girls. I mean, 4, 5, 6 years old. And I just had to, you know, keep breathing and quiet in order to be able to convince the guys to let me go into the hotel. So I did. And then it was horrible because after I saw some of these girls, and then the mothers, and then younger women, and like 16, 18, 21. And then I talked to some of them, and everybody was asking me to give them their blessings, and I was like, what is this? Up, right, left, how left, right? So I kept trying to remember because I was so nervous, and then once I got out of one of these hotels, and I saw this guy that was a very, very, very famous trafficker that is now in jail, fortunately, thanks to the work of many, many people. And when I came out, he said, wait, and he held my arm, and I was really scared. I was like,
you got caught.
And I was like, yes, my son. And he tells me, oh, give me your blessing, sister, please. And I was like, no way. I had to, of course, but I'm not a saint, so it's not worth it. So anyway, I had to do all these things in order to understand how they live, in order to be able to go in there without being killed. And I did so in Mexico, in Dominican Republic, and in Japan, everywhere. I went around the world. I went to Thailand, I went to Russia, I went to Kyrgyzstan, to the border of Afghanistan, to borders of China to understand how they traffic the young women. You know how I was trying to explain how politics and how public policy impacts people. We tend to hear, for example, in the news, I'm going to give you one example. In the news, we used to hear for a long, long time that the Chinese government was implementing the policy of one child, right? One child only. So we saw this infanticide of girls everywhere in China because everyone wanted to have a boy, right? So we saw this and heard these awful stories about little girls being killed and by their parents because they wanted a boy. And then now, 20 years later, what we have is millions of Chinese men without the possibility of getting married because there are no women of their age. And nobody thought about it when they implemented its public policy. So when I go there and I start talking to these guys, I was finally able to contact someone that contacted me with this guy that is a very weird Chinese man that I tell the story in the book. That he thinks that he's doing a great job into getting wives for certain men that can pay for them. Then you know he's a good man, apparently. That's what he thinks. But if you see exactly what he's doing, he's committing the crime of human trafficking, because he's going to little towns in which there are girls that the family saved, and he's getting these girls, he's offering the family some money, I mean nothing, I mean like $15, and telling them that the girl's gonna get married. And then he goes to another town and he sells the girl for $2,000 or $3,000. And he keeps the money and he sells the girl. So the husband and the family of the husband-to-be believes the girl is not a proper wife, but a bought bride. And there's a huge difference between being, as we all know, someone that falls in love or makes an arranged marriage, but it's, you know, it's arranged and it's not a money transaction. This is buying a human being. So these girls have no way out, and they are really, truly mistreated. So I wanted to understand this, how public policy affects human beings, not only now, today, as we said, but also in the future. And I connected the stories of China to the stories of Kyrgyzstan, to Cambodia and Thailand, and then I went to the Dominican Republic, and I started finding these patterns in which I saw how men from countries in which there are very good laws against human trafficking are traveling to the countries in which, even though we have laws against human trafficking, they are not properly implemented, or there's no rule of law, such as Mexico or Guatemala or Honduras or so many others. So that's what I worked at. I try to help people understand how these mafias are linking together, and how societies are also linking to help each other, because that's happening. I discovered these guys that, for example, as soon as the American government understood how many North American men, wealthy men, were traveling to Cambodia and Thailand to have sex with children, what they did, they implemented this policy in which they saw the ICE agents and immigration officers in the airports in the United States. They decided that if a man was traveling to Cambodia or to Thailand too many times a year by himself, he came back without a tan, he was going there for 3 or 4 days but had really no business going there, they would just pinpointing him. And then once they came back, they would get their computers open and check them. And 9 out of 10 times, they got them with child pornography or with evidence that they were having sex with little children in these countries. So they started prosecuting them. And that was exciting, right? So I came to the United States, I started documenting this, and I said, hey, this is happening, this is good. In a way, the American immigration officers and the police are really protecting the children from Cambodia and Thailand, right? But what do you know what? They started going to Cancun and looking for that, and they created a demand. And they started going to places, asking for taxi drivers. Can you take me to a nice brothel, but I need VIP. Do you have young girls? I need them virgins. I don't want anyone older. I don't want professional prostitutes. I like to have a relationship. So then the taxi drivers and all these networks understood there was a huge business in this. So when we talk about how the mafias and the clients are driving the business and are creating a huge industry, we are telling you the truth. So this has been happening all over the world, and now the trick is that the NGOs around the world are working together, which is a part of the nice side of the story. And I also talk to a lot of NGOs that are networking as strongly as the mafias are. And this is really interesting because I think this is what's going to change the map of international slavery around the world. Networking of all NGOs around the world. Because, for example, we in Cancun, there was a little girl, a 6-year-old girl was rescued from a little house in which she was sexually exploited for tourists. And she had with herself, I talked to her, she had, when they rescued her, a little bill, a Canadian bill, with a note of the client and his phone number, telling her, I love you, and his name. And he came and cruise in a cruise boat. So what they do is, now pedophiles know if they take a plane and go to certain areas too many times, they will be checked by the Canadian police now as by the American police. So now they take cruise ships. So what NGOs in Mexico did was they told Interpol and ICE agents in the US and every NGO that wanted to know about it, they told them, this is what's happening. This is another entrance of pedophiles. So I wanted to document this, how these bad guys are working in it, how the industry is working, and also how people are trying to tackle the problem. So this is pretty much the big picture of it.
I wanted to ask you just a couple of things, and I'd like to open it up for questions, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I have a twofold question. I guess the first one is, from all your travels, what country shocked you the most from what you found?
I suppose it was Japan, because from all I read, Japan, I've never been in Japan before, and from all I read was a very modern democracy in which people really, really got involved into the community, and there was no very low crime rate. So as long as I got there and I started talking to people, activists started telling me these awful stories, and then on the other hand, policemen said, no, there's nothing going on here. And then even some academics at the University of Tokyo that were willing to talk to me about the mafia, the Yakuza's history, and they were willing to talk to me about money laundering of the Yakuza, for example, telling me that the Yakuza used to be mafia like the cartels in Mexico, and all of a sudden they're bankers, they're politicians, that they are all inserted in regular life with all the dirty money, making more money, more clean money in Japan. And they were willing to talk about that. But once they started asking about the geisha industry, once started asking about this lolicon thing, the little Lolita lookalikes with the girls, nobody wanted to talk about that. So I stayed in Japan for a while. I got into these brothels in which they have very, very young men. It's also an industry not only for women but also for boys. And that shocked me. It shocked me because it's so normalized. Gender violence is truly normalized in Japan. Everybody's so nice. The first day I was like, oh my God, people are so nice. They were like really cool. So I was walking like that, like a Mexican, going like this, and then people go on this side of the road, they go up, on this side of the road, they go down. Nobody smokes in anywhere in the street where it's not allowed. Everybody was really educated, and all of a sudden I started going to the bars and the geisha bars of the Yakuza. And then there was true Japan. All these international businessmen going there looking for young women as young as 16, 17. And they came from Colombia. when everybody started telling me in these areas, like Colombian girls are so hot, and Japanese men love Latin women. And I felt so offended about it. It was like, wow, do you want to get into the business? No, you can still make it. It was awful. And then you could see Iranians were in charge of the heroin business with the Yakuza, but the Iranians were bringing Arab girls to the Japanese because they thought they were like very precious, very interesting. So there's this not only a gender issue there, but also a race issue. They are bought and sold as objects, as precious objects from different countries. So Japan was really shocking to me, I guess, and also because of impunity in Japan. It's very, very common.
You also added an element about that a lot of the men liked the Latin women because they were obedient.
Absolutely.
Which was different from other cultures. And the question to follow up, how did you deal with, I mean, this takes its toll emotionally to be out there, to be seeing this with your own eyes, documenting it, talking to the girls, talking to some of the traffickers, to intelligence. How do you deal with that? How do you come to grips with that reality, which is so evil, which is black and white, it's in your face, you've been there, you've lived it, you've seen it with your own eyes?
Well, I do, as you know, I do yoga almost every day. I meditate a lot. I go to therapy, of course. I cry a lot. I express my feelings with people I feel safe with, and I share the stories with people because when you listen to the stories, when you witness such horrors, sometimes you just feel that there's no hope for it. You know, we have been talking about hope the last few days, and then all of a sudden you talk to people. You're sitting with a group of people, and all of a sudden you know that there are a lot of people around the world that are really, really interested in changing things. They're doing something in their own community or even internationally, or they're reading about it. They're just doing something. I've met military men in the U.S. that after coming back from Vietnam, they understood what the military did regarding the creation of prostitution in Southeast Asia, and he has been fighting human slavery, and in particular women's slavery, for a long time now. So these are the people that, you know, give me hope back. They go like, okay, this is it. It's awful, but we're trying to change the world, and then this is it, sharing knowledge and stories and feelings, and of course the other thing that is really important to me is my family. You know, being near my family, my friends, dancing some salsa, having some tequila once in a while, you know, remembering that life goes on, that there's a lot of things going on, and then reading poetry and literature bring me, you know, down to the other side of earth, which is creative and loving.
Which is the great supportive part of it. Now, when you mentioned tequila and together with your friends,
Yes.
there's an anecdote in the book which it really scared the living daylights out of me when I read it, and it was when you got back from your trip and you wanted to go and join some friends, have some tequila, have a beer, and just kind of disconnect. And you came to face to face with yet another, not a threat on you, but a threat on someone else. And this was very real. And I think you should share that with them so that they know that every page they turn of this book is going to be, you know, a glimpse not only into your world, but, you know, into the world that you've uncovered, but into your world and what the price you've paid to report this.
Well, I was coming back with my partner, with my husband, and with some friends from a book fair, actually, and we were just enjoying ourselves and having a great time and just forgetting about the dramas of the world for a couple of days. And then back then I had the Special Federal Police had an intelligence group specialized in to fight against organized crime. So they knew that my life was in danger because of the death threats I kept getting by the traffickers. So they installed a big group of armed guards that were supposedly protecting me all the time. So the 3 armed guards came to the airport to pick us up in an armored car from the federal police, and we got into the armored car, and unfortunately, I just felt so comfortable, and I told my friends, poor guys, riders, oh, come on, we'll give you a ride, no problem. And they were like, oh, okay, this is funny, let's go into an armored car. So we all got into the van, and then once we got into the highway, all of a sudden the van was just moving all over, and it almost tripped. And then it was in second. We didn't understand what was going on, and when we stopped, finally were able to stop, one of the guards just took her gun out, and she said, out, immediately, now. So we went out of the car, and we noticed that they had sabotaged the car because they wanted the car not only to trip but also to explode. So we had to run to the other side of the street, and the guard put us in a taxi cab, and we got to the house. And our friends, some of them, all of them are fiction writers, and they were like, no, shit, this is so what
Not
is
fiction.
going on,
Not fiction. Yeah.
So, fortunately nothing happened aside of the big scare. But yeah, this is part of life.
There's a part about the napkin too that.
Oh,
I thought. I mean, that was
Oh,
really.
okay.
Thanks for sharing that. But
okay.
but I was actually referring to the
All
napkin.
right, yes. We were in a very nice restaurant in Cancun that is on the lagoon side with a couple of my best friends. They work in hotels, have nothing to do with journalism whatsoever. And they do go to restaurants with me, even though I had death threats, so they are really good friends. And we went to this fancy restaurant. I dressed up nicely, and we went there. We were planning to just have laughs, talk about life, whatever. And we went in, and we were having dinner. And all of a sudden, the waiter comes over, and he said, Miss Lydia, the guy over there sent you a bottle of champagne. And he's just bringing the champagne like that. And I look at the guy, and he looked like your regular drug dealer, like sort of fancy looking, and with two girls that they came from the VIP club, whatever. So I told him no, thank you. Tell him I buy my own alcohol, and I don't take anything from strangers. So he goes, please say yes, Miss Cacho. And I said no. So most of these waiters know me. And so he goes back, and then the guy tries to send the bottle back, and I say no. And then minutes later, I stand up, and I'm going towards the toilet. And then he comes towards me, and he stops me right there. He cuts through the bar, and he stands in front of me. And there's like 4 or 5 waiters just standing there going like, oh, shit, like this is the bad guy, and Lydia Cacho is doing something. And I was just standing there looking at him, and his big gold medal. And he stares at me, and he goes, Miss Cacho, it's so nice to meet you. And I keep looking at him, and I said, yeah, this is a Zeta, the Zeta cartel in Mexico. And I was like, this is one of the leaders of the Zetas in Cancun. And he's talking to me in the restaurant. I was looking at everyone, I'm like, okay. And he tells me, I admire you so much. You and I are so much alike. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, we are both fighting the powers that be, these corrupted politicians. We're fighting impunity. We're working for the people, so I really, truly admire you, and I want to offer my help. And I said, yes. He said, okay, I want to get killed. The governor of Puebla got you tortured and incarcerated. I want to kill Kamel Nassif, one of the big businessmen. And he started, giving me the names of the guy he was offering to kill. And I didn't know what. I was like, what do you say to an offer like this? And most of my friends said, you say yes. But I, of course, it just, subconscious speaking. But no. So all I could say was, no, thank you. And he just looks at me and he goes, I know, you're a very decent woman. You're a lady, so let's do something. Go to the toilet, go back to your table, and once you're sitting there, think about it. And if you decide that I will be the sole responsible person for these killings. You have no link to them whatsoever. So don't worry about it. And all the waiters are standing there listening to this. And I'm like, sure, no witness here. And and he said, go back to your table, and once you decide that you want them killed, you just drop your napkin. And once your napkin is dropped,
That's a sign.
it's done deal, right? So I go to the toilet, I'm just going like this, and then I go back, and I sit in the table, and I tell my friends, okay. They wanted to know all about it, but they were really scared. They were like, are we leaving? Are we leaving? And I just said, okay, if anybody drops a napkin in this table, you will be killed by me. And then I published the story, of course, in the book, because it's what happened. And I met the guy again in a restaurant a year later. And I'm sitting with my sister, and he comes towards me, and he goes, Miss Cacho, how are you? I read your book, Slavery. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, now he's going to kill me. He goes, very good book, very well written. Thank you for talking about me. And he goes back and sits down. And I'm like, okay, this is it, so that's life.
Do any of you have any questions you'd like to ask? Lady in the back. Okay.
Hi, Lydia. Thank you so much for all of your work and your tenacity, and really for inspiring women and all of us to get involved in human rights work. I have two questions. One, I'm curious about any work that you've done or are doing around unaccompanied children at the border fleeing violence in El Salvador and in Central America and Honduras, and particularly because we know that 40% of them are now girls and are very vulnerable to trafficking. And then my other question is, I work with the National Domestic Workers Alliance here in the United States, and we're launching an anti-trafficking project called Beyond Survival that really focuses on domestic worker trafficking and labor trafficking, which is so prevalent. And I'm curious, here in Miami in particular, there's many domestic workers who are brought here and their passports taken away, and then they're paid very little or nothing for years. And I'm curious if you've done any labor trafficking investigation.
Oh, yes. Yes, I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, regarding the children that are crossing the borders, I am not doing something personally. What I've been doing for a while is sort of helping an amazing group of men and women. Basically, they were created as a small group of academics called migrantólogos. And what they did is a group of men and women in Mexico from the Colegio de Mexico that decided to investigate really what was happening, how the trails were working regarding immigrants from all over Latin America through Mexico, going through Mexico. And they've been doing that for a long time now. What they did was created this incredible network with all sorts of NGOs, and now they are working with a group of lawyers in Texas. And they are making great progress in reuniting families, mothers or fathers that have been living in the U.S. for 20 years or so, and they were sent back to Mexico, but the kids were kept in the U.S. And now the American government is trying to give these children as adopted children to other people without the parents' consent. So we're working on that. I'm trying to help them through journalism. And then I've been also documenting some of the cases of the little girls, and young women that have been crossing all the way from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador through the southeast of Mexico. That's where I live. And then how they do their journey, and how many times and from how many groups, criminal groups, have been exploited. And we are documenting this. But what I can tell you about this is that this group of migrantólogos and some experts from Mexico told us 10 years ago that what we're seeing today was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden, what's going on, the government is closing the borders, and these guys are getting more guns to protect the border. But yes, some of the traffickers, human traffickers, particularly some of the most violent criminal gangs in Mexico, are making a lot of money with this. And we're documenting that and trying to share it with the American NGOs and try to expose that, what really is going on. I'm sorry, it had to be short, but it can't. I want to say something that is really important in this case. When the American government got involved into the coup in Honduras, we in Mexico kept telling everyone that wanted to listen to us, this is going to explode in your hands, because Honduras is a young democracy, but it was a democracy. They were doing their best, and people voted for this guy. 90% of the people voted for this guy, and that's why he got in office. And all of a sudden, Washington wanted to get rid of him. Boom, 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 CIA, the same story as always. And then all of a sudden, they have this guy that is, people do not feel represented in Honduras by this man. And then now they are the most violent country in the world, or one of the most violent countries in the world that is not at war. It's because they stole democracy from them. Partly, of course, that's not the only reason. So this is international policy. This is how it affects. So when Obama goes like, we don't know what's going on in Honduras, hey, look at your plan for the coup. That's part of it.
Goes back to that. Okay. We're gonna continue with your questions, but we're actually gonna have some questions from the folks who are joining us via the live stream. We do have some we're ready to read, and then we'll come back to you since you're here. So we're gonna try to be fair and balance it out.
Thank you, Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from a human rights lawyer in Colombia. Her name is Angelica Sofia Clavijo, and she asks Lydia, how can people take action and help what is referenced as prepaid women that are frequently found without documents and are afraid and controlled by the mob? Coming from Colombia.
Of course, they call them las chicas prepago, which is prepaid. Can you imagine that?
Prepaid
Somebody
women.
else has already paid for somebody, and the transaction happens between even two countries, two men, or a woman or a man, without her knowing. I think that some NGOs in Colombia are trying to do great work on gender violence, but now they have very recently passed a law against gender violence in Colombia. And this is really important, because from that law, people have to begin, men and women in Colombia have to begin addressing the issue of forced prostitution, and then how the cartels implemented this industry, sex industry of girls and women. Some of you know the stories of the Sin Tetas No Hay Paraíso, without breasts, there's no paradise. Whatever. It's a novel, but it's based in true stories. And I think that the point is to reinforce gender violence issues, because that's what it is. It's sexual violence, it's human trafficking, and it's of course they call it pornotopia, which is the normalization of pornography and prostitution in very, very young girls.
Thank you. And we have one more question from Texas, from a fellow journalist, Mariana Pineda Navarro, and she asks, do you believe your book, The Demons of Eden, opened up a Pandora's box?
Well, yes, I think it did. I remember when I published it, and I thought that like 2,000 or 3,000 people were going to read it, and I thought it was wonderful. A lot of people stopped me and said, "You're the one who wrote the book on child pornography. Are you making this up? Like, really? Does it exist?" And now that we have sold like 700, 800,000 books of that around the world, now people do understand that it's a true story. So yes, I did, and of course it cost me my freedom for a while, but I'm proud of it. I'm really, really proud of that book, because I just made a commitment to the young girls that told me their stories, and I stuck to that commitment, and I will stick to it for the rest of my life.
Thank you. Let's take a question.
What do you think will happen with children that are being coming to the United States from Latin America now and are not returning? Those that are not returning back. What long-term effect will it have?
Well, you mean the ones that are not sending back? Because
right, they're trying to send them back, but many times they don't catch them, or they stay here anyway.
Well, if they go through the border and they cannot find their families or somebody they know, they will probably get into a vulnerable state, and a lot of people can exploit them again. So I think that NGOs that work, like non-governmental organizations that work along the borders of the U.S., have really to get together to help these children. And then, of course, the U.S. government, if these kids stay here, they can become slaves of a lot of people, not only sex slaves, but labor slaves, and of course, agricultural slaves, mainly in Texas, of course, in Arizona, we know that.
Other questions? Let me get some from this side of the room. Okay, who had their hand up? The lady with the yellow flower.
Is the Italian mafia involved in any capacity?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, I'm talking about, in the book I explain exactly how the Italian mafia is linked to also the Mexican cartels, and they are just like businessmen making business every day. With the Russian mafia operating, for example, in Miami, and I link it to the Russian mafia that is operating in Playa del Carmen, near where I live, near Cancun, and how they also operate in Mexico City. So yes, I explain exactly how the trails and how they share the business and money from all the mafias in the world, basically. From
Sure.
Is there any resource that runaway girls can you go, because they are so often exploited?
Absolutely. There are many resources in everywhere around the world. I mean, organizations, women's organizations, or even some religious organizations that are doing a great job working with young girls and young boys that run away from home, which also helps us understand we have to readdress again and again the fact that domestic violence is there and that millions of children are running away from very violent homes. And when they go to the streets and somebody offers to help them and they get that help, sometimes if they are slaves, they think that even that kind of slavery, if they are not battered or raped, it's better than being at home. So I think that not only in Mexico, but also in the U.S., we really need to readdress child battering and child abuse and domestic violence again and again.
Okay. Yes, this lady here.
Yes. I've been in the Miami-Dade County Commission for Women for 9 years, and I spoke to many people at the domestic shelters, and I noticed that people here are not aware that if you're a victim of violence, including, labor slave or sexual slave, you can get a visa, you can stay away from these bad people, come forward, the government will protect you, and you can get the visa as a victim. Why? I read a lot and I don't see that much attention to this fact, and it's not well known among the people, because I speak to a lot of people that have encountered those types of situations.
I think that I've talked to a lot of organizations in the U.S., all over, from Utah to Washington to Texas. And what I find is that some of them find it so hard to get good lawyers to go through the process of acquiring those special visas, that at the beginning it was like, wow, I remember the presentation of these visas by some people of the Department of State in San Francisco in a big conference. So I was there documenting it as a journalist, and these guys were saying, this is it, we're the good guys, we're getting these visas. And all of a sudden these lawyers, stand up and say, hey, we've been trying to get visa for this and this and these victims, and that are American, and that, that were brought somewhere else, they got, their papers will disappear, and they can't even come back. Things like that. You could hear all kinds of stories. And what they say is that it truly takes more than 2 to 3 years to go through the legal process. So if the American government really and truly wants to get these visas implemented and to prove that it works, they have to make the process slower and more effective.
Good to know.
Okay.
Folks, we're a little bit pressed for time. We're going to be able to take one more question before we start signing some books. Thank you.
Do you think in our lifetime this could be somewhat resolved? And what are the governments all over the world doing to help prevent this?
I hope so. I hope that it can change in our lifetime, at least a little. You know, I think we need to readdress education and not only education in general, but sexual and reproductive rights education with children. Because if we have statistics prove that girls in the U.S. begin their sex life between 11 and 13 years old. So if that's so in the majority of girls, then we have to tell them what's they're owners of their own body and what pornography is, what it does to you if you get involved in that, what sexting is. I mean, this came, all this child pornography and everything came to us really, really fast, and traffickers got the idea faster than general society did. Now we're learning, so we have to educate ourselves, and we have to bring these stories to schools everywhere. I think the media plays a big role in this. We have to stop just telling the horrific stories, which are important, of course, but we have to stop going towards that, and we have to start telling survivors, victims, and explain stories, and we have to tell what can be done and how girls and young men can be empowered by not being slaves, because it's just something we're not telling them. It seems so obvious, but it's not. We're doing a campaign in Cancun. We've been educating kids. We train teenage guys, men and girls, to teach younger kids how to prevent trafficking from schools, how to watch out for kids their age that are being controlled and educated as pimps, to get them and to bring them to traffickers. And it is amazing. What the campaign has done is amazing. We have 8,000 kids educated. And they are so powerful, and you hear the stories everywhere, in public schools, in private schools, and this is what we're doing. We're taking the fear away from it, and we're telling this is what's happening, you know about it, they all know about child pornography, they all know about pornography in the internet, they watch it at least twice a week, so they know about it. Let's not talk about it like from a horrific point of view, but say, this is it, this is what it can do to you, and this is what you can do to protect yourself and to protect others. And you would be surprised how well it works. And then some governments are doing a good job, but then again, the mafias are going faster than governments. And then as long as governments everywhere around the world have these ridiculous immigration laws that are contradictory, and then on one hand they open the doors, but on the other hand they slam it on immigrants, nothing will work. They have to really work into, if we are a global society, then we have to act like one. If we're not, then we have to set new rules for that.
And on that note, Lydia, thank you so much for sharing your work, your story, your passion, your commitment. We know it's making a difference, and thank all of you for joining us. She will be here. We'll be signing books. Thanks to those who joined us via live stream.
Of course, we have, ladies, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Very important story. Thank you. We do have the books for sale behind the counter. She will be sitting right here to sign for you. You can ask a few more questions there. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.